church. I called in through the week. This is a church I used to worship with, and Jackie was my old pastor. So I called in. He told me he had a picture for the kind of promotion of tonight. And I says, Jackie, I've pictures of Everest. He stood up and he shouted at me, this is not about Everest. And there's no way I would be, kind of wanting to boast about Everest or about being in Everest. But he softened, as he usually does, and he kind of wrote that on the end of the wee picture that he put up. And he's right. He's 100% right. It's not about Everest. There may be a little bit about that tonight, but it's about Christ. It always is. When a Christian stands up, if you hear and learn more about them than you do about Christ, and if he's not even in the midst of that, then you haven't heard a testimony. Jackie put it on as a Shankill Road man, and I am a true son of the Shankill Road. I love the Shankill Road. I absolutely do. When you say that, usually you think you have to do one of two things. You have to apologise or you have to give an explanation. So I'll give an explanation. Firstly, I do not mean anything sectarian in that at all whatsoever. These are the streets where I kicked the ball. Played Rapidors, Penguins, garden fence, Grand Nationals, all the stuff that you do when you're young. Hunts, roller disco, back at a time whenever the skates you had to put on over the top of your shoes. And it was actually in the place where we later had our church. So all of that. The Westie Disco, Backs of the Park, The Venture. Got my first pair of 20 pleat Spencers. Tartan jeans, back when I had hair, I remember getting it tipped. Breakdancing. How cool is breakdancing? Still breakdancing today, whenever they were celebrating the Platinum Jubilee. Used to beat about with my own wee oilcloth and all underneath my arm, and you used to be in your wee gangs and used to challenge people to do the breakdancing. And I know I've kind of lost 50% of the room. Everybody who's 40 and below is all going, what on earth is he talking about? And everybody my age and above knows exactly where that's at. This is where I kind of lived the best decade for music, 80s. Absolutely amazing. It's where I learned about friendship, I learned about life, I learned about loss, and I love the people here. I absolutely love the people here because, there's just that looking out for each other, and it's still there. Some people say it's gone. It's not gone. It's still there. And I just love the character of the people that are here. And just to prove that I don't mean anything sectarian, here's me, 1974, height of the Troubles, and my ma saw fit to put me in a trickler. So there you go, absolutely nothing sectarian in that at all. But we know that the Shankill it's kind of famous for all of those things, but it's also famous for things that are not so good. We rank among the highest in terms of deprivation, the highest in terms of self-harm, the highest in terms of suicide rates, mental health issues, alcohol, addiction, all of that's right up there. We're not the only community that suffers all of that and has all of the characters that I described, but we are definitely well up there. Something my own home knows only so well. You see, I didn't grow up in a Christian family. I grew up in a family that had a lot of issues. My dad was the son of a generation or generations of drinking men, and so he kind of followed in the same footsteps. Some of my earliest memories were my dad was like a home drinker. He was always drinking in the home, and it was back in the days when it wasn't illegal to have bikini-clad women up the side of your beers. So I kind of remember that. I saw that. Tenants, I think it was, with the ladies in bikinis that were all up the side of the cans. And he was never a kind of violent man or anything, but my mum didn't get it easy. Because I guess when you prioritise something like alcohol, then everything else kind of falls to the wayside. And I know I'm not talking to a room full of people that don't have a sense of that. I remember being very young, and he didn't go to work. He just didn't work. And I remember kind of getting my wee backpack on, and I was heading out to primary school. And my dad shouting down the stairs to my mum, Kathleen, don't make me a piece. I'm not going into work today because it's raining. And there's me with my wee backpack on, heading out to primary school. And you kind of know there's something wrong with that picture. And I think kind of as the years went on, my mum kind of had a lot of stress with that. She developed her own issues of depression and her own issues around alcohol. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying this to slag off my parents. I would not swap my mum for anyone. My mum is the kindest wee lady ever, and I have been much loved. What I'm doing is giving a context, I guess, to the things that shaped me, because it kind of led to me becoming involved in some of the things that I did even whenever I got saved. Sunday school. I belong to the age-old tradition of being made to go to Sunday school. But the truth is, I loved Sunday school. I really did. I went to a wee gospel hall called Matchett Street, and they were old school. You got all the stories in the Bible. You learned about your first superheroes. Daniel and the lion's den, David facing Goliath, Samson the strong man, all the stories about Jesus. And those wee evangelist Sunday school teachers were always so careful. They always tell you, see, no matter who the characters are in this story, God's always the hero. And I got that. It made sense. I had a great memory when I was young, and this was brilliant because I realised that if I could remember Bible verses and say them back to these Christians, they would get really excited and they would give you sweets. So I got lots of sweets. It was a real benefit of having a good memory. But I believed in God. As young as I was really young, but I believed. It just made sense. Even though I was quite young, I knew there was sin in my life. I knew I did not have to be taught to cheek back my parents, to lie, to do all of that. It was there even at a very, very young age. And I knew I needed God's forgiveness, and I asked for it. And I was saved. I don't know what age, but I was saved. As I got older, I became a bit of a crowd pleaser, as you do. Maybe it's what Boneyard says, when you're standing up and you're a wee man, and there's that wee man syndrome where you're kind of always trying and be louder and bigger than what you are. And so as I hung about with friends, I tended to hang about with people that were maybe 3 and 4 years older than me. And I do remember thinking, I will have my faith in God, but I'll keep it to myself. I'll keep it where it's easy to keep in my home. And then when I'm out with my mates, I can do and be what I want. The Bible, there's a verse there, I didn't know it then, but it says you can't serve two masters. You're going to love one, you're going to hate the other. And that's exactly what happened. So I think my faith then became a mumbled prayer late at night, like a superstition, just to try and deal with guilt. Where it becomes like it's all one word with an amen at the end of it, because you say it that much and it's so repetitive. And so I kind of moved away from all of that. Again, when you hang about with people that are 3 and 4 years older, they bring you into choices you aren't really ready to make. And a lot of them weren't ready to make them either. First drunk aged 11, even though I grew up in a home with alcohol issues. Solvents aged 11, smoking aged 11, drinking every weekend from 13, first stoned about 13, dabbling with various things, drinking 4 nights a week from about 16 because I worked in the shipyard and I could afford it. Rioting from really young, again, not about hating people, but just you try and make yourself believe you do. The more I tried to be the master of my own identity as I was growing up, the more lost I became. I would not have came to a meeting like this. I found it easy to say no to God behind his back, in my mind anyway. But if I had came to a meeting where somebody was standing from the front saying, listen, you need to get your life right, I would have found that much harder. So I would have avoided coming to church. I would have avoided coming to any meetings. So as kind of time went on, I struggled with alcohol, major anxiety attacks, major panic attacks, probably because of stuff that I was dabbling with and all of that. And I kind of remember coming back from parties and all, and being on my bedroom floor crying and saying to God, I know you want me back, but give me a few more years of this. Bizarre, because I was miserable, absolutely miserable, yet with all you were still calling and saying to God, look, I know I'm going to come to you at some stage, but just give me a bit more of this. 21, whenever I got on my knees on my bedroom floor, crying my lamps out, and it was a mess. My life was a mess. And I remember feeling I didn't deserve God to help me, and I probably thought he might not have. I actually thought that he might not even accept me back, because it's one thing to do all of this and to live a life of rebellion, not really knowing about God, but to know about God and to live that life of rebellion, there's so much more guilt there. So I remember crying and saying, God, just take me back. Don't fix anything. Don't change anything. Just take me back. And there's always barriers. There's always things that stick out in your mind. A big barrier that prevented me from coming to that for so long was thinking I would be in a church full of old people and that life would be boring as a Christian. It couldn't have been further from the truth. And the fellowship that I became part of was with Jackie and with Kathleen, and it was amazing, absolutely incredible. Living in the Daesh involves a lot of things, and I could spend hours talking about my life before I got saved, a lot of the stuff that went on. But then again, you would know more about me and maybe not as much about Christ. So I kind of thought about what I would do, and it's probably why I've been so nervous about tonight, because I thought what I would do in order to see Christ and to see him in evidence in my life is I would touch on something tender, something that's sore. And I would look at how God has been God to me in relation to that difficulty. So I'm going to touch on a tender part. I recently completed Everest base camp. And it was base camp. Lots of people think you can summit like as though that's just a thing that people can do. You have to live at base camp for 10 weeks. You'd have to go up and down till you acclimatise. You'd need about 25 grand to be able to pay. So that was never an option. And you'd have to be very skilled as well. So I went to base camp. When you tell people you go to base camp, then they go, oh, you just went to the bottom of a mountain. It is not the bottom of a mountain. It took 8 days to get there. It took 3 days to get back. If you want to kind of get a picture for this, 5,364 metres high. That's about 4 Ben Nevises on top of each other. It's about 15 cave hills. Or if you could clone Boneyard, it's about 3,500 boneyards. If you can kind of get him to stand on his own head, he would just shoot up into the sky. 3.5, that's a lot of boneyards. 3,500 times. And it's not even as though you just go up and you just come down. It's not linear. Everything is up and down, all the way till you get there and all the way coming back as well. So it was definitely a challenge. So why Everest? What was the point of that? What was it about? This is Leah. I met her mum through the church when I was going to the church, and began to have a relationship with her mum, and realised that as that began to grow and began to get stronger, that she was a package deal. She was a single mum with Leah, and I knew I could not commit to mum without being prepared to commit to Leah. Leah was a wee skinny redhead. She was a wee gem. She was quirky and lovable. She wasn't hard to love. And I kind of remember probably the first time that I really had a sense of that. Again, I was only a kid. I was about 22. Leah was about 6. About 6 or 7 around this time. And we were up in the stadium. It's a time whenever you had to build the church. It was like a sports hall. We had to put out the heaviest curtains ever and set them all up and set up the chairs. And people are laughing here because there's lots of people from that and remember that. And it was amazing. It was incredible. But I remember one of those nights, I have this wee skinny redhead sleeping on my lap, and I just looked down and I just thought, it's not going to be a problem to love this kid. And I was probably a weird kid too. I remember being very young and praying to God to have a family. I don't know if that's strange. I've never heard anybody else say that to do that. Her dad wasn't on the scene for various reasons, so all those things kind of conspired to me becoming Leah's dad. She was my daughter, not by birth. She was my daughter by choice. And so we did got married. We did all the things that you do as families. Here's holidaying up on the north coast. Here's Leah. She was around 8 whenever Luke was born. Here she is with both of her brothers, Luke and Caleb. She was about 11 or 12 whenever Caleb was born. There was no difference. These were my 3 children and will always be my 3 children. I have another one too, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Here was her on her prom night. It was hard to get pictures with Leah, to be honest, because she tended to have control of what pictures could be taken. And that seemed to get worse as well as she got older too. And she was stunning. She really was. Here she was at my wedding, which was here. There's so much in my life that definitely weaves in and out. I don't come to this church anymore, haven't for, maybe about 15 years. But yeah, with all, there's so much of this church that weaves in and out of my life still. She was beautiful, absolutely stunning. Here's an image of little Sully. This is precious because I don't have very many pictures of her with Sully. Sully was born in February 2018. And again, it was one of those ones where if you saw this on the live photo, you see her turning her face away as I had took the picture because she just struggled with impromptu photos. But I treasure this photo. So here is Leah. I am someone who is often a victim of their own mind. My moods are very unpredictable, which can make my life very hard. I never know when a dark patch is going to hit me. After a few horrible months recently, with a lot of strength and hard work, I am slowly but surely coming back to the light. And each time I come out a stronger and better me. I know everyone and their story is different, but anyone on my page battling with their mind, please hang on in there. Please remember my mails are always open for anyone who needs to vent or chat, no matter how big or small you may think your problems may be. Leah struggled with mental health when she was a teenager. And they say that, all the people that study mental health say, people who are going to develop mental health illness, quite often, you're going to see it when they're around 14 or 15, in those teenage years. 50% are going to develop it there. And she struggled for a long, long time. But this was where she was beginning to pick up. This was May in 2018. Here was one of our wee gram shots. 2nd of June 2018. Actually feel like the luckiest girl in the world. She was on a luxury yacht off the coast of Cannes, off the coast of France. This was my daughter's last sunset that she would see. The 2nd of June 2018. And it's not that this post wasn't real. I have no doubt that it was real. But there were a lot of things that conspired against Leah. I remember the phone call the next day. And it was from her auntie, Andrea, who's here tonight. And it was a Sunday morning, the 3rd of June. It was marked by Friday, was the 3rd of June, 4 years on Friday. And I remember Andrea ringing, and it was unusual to get an early morning call, Sunday morning, and me taking the phone and, hey, what's happening? How are you? And she said, Jim, it's Leah. She was crying. Jim, it's Leah. Leah's dead. It's one of those ones where you kind of pull back from the phone because you're going, this is not real. What are you talking about? And she began to describe what had happened. And Leah had took her own life off the coast of Cannes. And when I said things were conspiring against her, she was on a really positive up mood. And that can be really difficult for somebody that struggles with mental health. She changed her medication and she was drinking. And they're not good things to combine. They're never good things to combine. So Leah on a luxury yacht, and I do believe if she'd have maybe saw through that night, then she'd be here tonight. I'd be talking about some other vulnerability, and she'd be sitting in this room. She'd be 32. But she was 28 years old. And all of a sudden, you're plunged into grief that you can't do anything about. I had been bereaved before. My dad had died years before this, but he knew the right order. He was born, he lived, he got old, he got ill, and he died. And that's generally the right order. But we know it doesn't always work that way. And when it doesn't work that way, you're just plunged into grief. There's very little you can do about it. I'm going to use a wee example because I teach about grief. Maybe that's been part of my own kind of journey. I deal with critical incidents in schools. And I teach about grief, not to the kids, but I teach about this to the teaching staff and the other professionals. You've heard that grief gets smaller through time. That time heals grief. I don't believe that. And the lady who did this model didn't believe it either. She's called Dr. Lois Tonkin. So this is the first jar. When you're first significantly bereaved, that's the grief inside. It fills the jar. You are filled. There's no room for anything else. And those feelings like disbelief, brokenness, anger, sadness, guilt, confusion, all the questions, particularly if it's suicide, all the what if questions that you struggle with and you drive yourself mad with, there's no room. They don't just stay in your mind. They move to where you can't eat. They move to where you struggle to sleep. They move to where you struggle to think and concentrate. But what she says is, rather than grief shrinking, the grief stays the same size, but the jar gets bigger. And as time moves on, the grief stays the same size and the jar gets bigger. You grow around your grief. So at times like the 3rd of June, you tap back into that grief just like it was in that jar. At times like birthdays, at times like Christmas, at times when you remember things, then you go back into that jar, back into that grief. But you don't live there. You don't. Or you shouldn't. So, how has God helped? I have found God is unyielding. He is uncompromising. He is unlimited in his pursuit of his glory and his grace and his joy that he wants to put in us. You know, happiness lives here. It's shallow. Joy lives here. It's deep. And it can be much deeper than your pain. I'm going to talk about 3 ways that I believe God most definitely helped me with grief. First one's walking the mountains. The day I got that call from Andre, I found myself up on Cave Hill. I didn't really walk mountains, the odd time, but no more than anybody else. I would have walked beaches because beaches were easy. And all of a sudden you find yourself on the mountain. And I used to think to myself, why am I on the mountain? What is it about the mountain? There's a bit of pain when you're walking mountains. And it taps into that. I found myself up there on that day talking to Leah's friends who were good friends then, and they are good friends now. And they were with her. Really, really good friends. And I found myself talking to God, trying to make sense of it all. I genuinely never felt angry at God. I felt confused, but I never felt angry because I trust him. You know, I know who he is, and I've had, you know, by then I had, 20 years experience of him. But I was hurt. I was confused. We know God can stop whatever he chooses to, and he didn't. And that was a struggle. So I began walking the mountains out of grief. I think that's how it tied into Everest, because he always wanted to do something for the Kevin Bell Repatriation Trust, who brought her back from France. It's one thing to be plunged into all the grief, and then when you realise the person that you love that's died isn't even in the country, and there's all the stuff that needs to happen and take place. So they were amazing charity. So really 4 years later was whenever I felt as though that's something that I could do. I was listening to worship when I was up on the mountains with the headphones. You'll still see me. You'd have saw me today at Robin's Well. You'd have saw me on Friday back up at Cave Hill. I was listening to sermons because I wanted God's medicine of his word just to keep pouring in to me. I was conscious of remembering John 11, which is the story of Lazarus, Jesus' friend, and how whenever he knows that he's ill, Jesus leaves him and says that as a purpose, I'm going to leave him. When he eventually goes to Bethany, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days, so much so the Bible says he smelt, he stank. You know, you're dealing with the Middle East, the temperatures, and so all of that's going on. And this is the 11 and 35 where we get the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. He didn't cry because of Lazarus. He always knew he was going to call Lazarus out. Lazarus was going to shake off those grave clothes and he was going to live. He cried because he was moved with compassion for Mary, Lazarus' sister, who he was talking to just before he went to bring out Lazarus. And he was crying because he felt their grief. So when I was on the mountain, I was very conscious. I was with a God who could feel my grief, a God who could hold the jar and allow that space to be able to grow, a God who could hold tight to the jar and stop it shattering into 1,000 pieces. I remember Psalm 121, where it says, he will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. So when I woke up in the middle of the night, fearful, anxious, guilty, all of that, I remembered God was already awake. I remembered Psalm 34, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves the crushed in spirit. That's my walk in the mountains, and I love walking the mountains. This one is about Jackie and Johnny. I cut my teeth as a Christian with Jackie and under Jackie's ministry. I remember the grace and the kindness of Jackie and Kathleen, who opened their home up every single week with people to call up after church for meetings, play games, eat food, debate, stroke, argue, probably more argue than debate, generally trash the place. And we called it fellowship. Unbelievable kindness from you and Kathleen and from your children, Jack and all, who was much younger then, you know, and we invaded their home on a regular basis. I remember being up there at a time whenever there was civil unrest. Can't remember who was to blame. You know, it's always one or the other or both. There was about 30 people living or sleeping that night across Jackie's house. Leah was up with us. It was like dead bodies everywhere in Jackie's kitchen and living room. Unbelievable kindness. And in all honesty, I have totally benefited from the ministry that you put into my life. Absolutely. Your grace, kindness, forgiveness, wisdom, mercy, and love is definitely a picture of the Christ that we serve. Jack, I never served under his ministry, but I've greatly benefited from your friendship, Jack, wherever you are. And I know that even when we don't see each other for a long time, I just got to ring you, and vice versa. So I spent some of the best days of my life within this church. You know, not necessarily this building, but within this church. And as the people move, that's the church. So it's this church. But I also spent my worst day ever in this church, in this building. June the 15th, 2018, Leah was buried from this room. I remember coming through those doors. There were so many people outside. When you come in here, it was just all a blur. There was people everywhere. It was complicated. It was difficult. I remember Jack and Johnny coming over to me. And I remember I was in with my two lads, Luke and Caleb. I remember Jack and Johnny coming over and just Jack putting his hand on my shoulder and saying, "Jim, we've got your back." He made the storm be still and the waves of the sea were hushed. And I'll be honest, that helped in that immediate moment. But that day was the worst day of my life. But it has encouraged me ever since. I don't even know if you remember that, Jackie, but that has encouraged me ever since, because I saw the words coming from your lips, but I knew that was God. And I knew you were willing to say them, but I knew that was God. And I will always remember that when it come to writing this, when it come to thinking about being here tonight, I was just so mindful of that. I've got your back. We've got your back. It reminded me that the Lord is my keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. Again, Psalm 121. The third one I'll say is day 8. Recently we had the Platinum Jubilee for the Queen. Service was held in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, which was designed by Christopher Wren. He designed loads and loads of the big iconic buildings in London, the old ones, after the fire of London. He's buried in that cathedral. And on the tomb it says, "If you seek his memorial, look around you." Guys, when I got to Nepal, and I was up, and I was in the midst of all of those mountains. And it's true, no matter where you are, if you seek God, he is all around you. He's up a cave hill, he's here, he's out in the sky, he's everywhere in his creation. But it's especially true when you're up in those mountains and you're in there. I broke bread. I don't know if you noticed that, but I broke bread. I was there on Easter Sunday. And it was a place just outside Labouchet. And I broke bread. I went off on my own. And I remembered him until he comes. And I was walking through these mountains. And I'll be honest, Everest is a name we call Everest. The locals call Everest Sagar Matha. Sagar Matha means goddess of the sky. So a lot of, and it's steeped in like Hinduism and Buddhism. There's prayer wheels everywhere. There's prayer flags everywhere. And you're so conscious. When I was thinking of Psalm 121, which says, "I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come?" The psalmist answers the question. He says, "My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth." But the Nepali people are praying to these mountains. Amadablam, Mother God. All of these mountains have names like that. They're all like deities. And it's the same if you jump over the mountain into Tibet. Chumalungma is the name for Everest there. And it means similar things. It's the deities that they come around. So I'm very conscious, while I was praying to the one who said Everest up, they're praying to the mountain, a big lump of granite. I was like a superhero when I was out there. I was, see, up until day 8, and that's why I called this day 8. I was really, really strong. I was looking at other people who were part of that group. There was 14 of us. One went back after 5 days, but I was looking at the rest and thinking, there's a lot here who should be much fitter than me. But I felt really, really strong until day 8, and I hit a wall. I firmly believe me hitting the wall was God. Sometimes God's kindness doesn't always look like kindness. And I'll tell you why. If I'd have came back from Everest saying, that was a gift, that was easy, boasting about it, hey, no trouble whatsoever, then where would my journey of grief been? It was about highlighting about the issue of grief. It was about highlighting about the issue of suicide. It was about trying to process some of my own grief. So I firmly believe that I hit a wall. I don't know whether it was altitude, whether it was exhaustion, whatever it was, but on day 8, which was one of the toughest days of that trek, even if you hadn't have been struggling, but I felt like I was going to fall down, I was going to faint. And I remember being more afraid of not finishing than of telling the guide, the Sherpa, this is the way I feel, because they take decisions out of your hands. If you say you don't feel well and they think that's strong enough, they just go, right, no, you're off. And there were people who were being airlifted on a daily basis, on a regular basis, being pulled down. And this is on an Everest base camp track. And it reminded me of Psalm 121. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. You know, sometimes that all evil is you. Again, if I had came away boasting, and I was boasting in my own head, I was looking around me going, I'm Jack a lot here. Look at how strong I am. And that was ripped away on day 8. Absolutely ripped away, where I thought I was going to have to be airlifted off. But it wasn't. And I got to base camp, and I had the chance to bring a little flower. It was a rainbow rose. I have 3. They're taken from the day that Leah was buried, and we had some rainbow roses. Mine, Luke's, and Caleb's. And I had them framed in my kitchen on a frame with Leah there. You can just see that in the background of the middle picture. And I cut one out, and I brought it with me, and I left it at Everest. And again, that's all part of that journey of being able to deal with grief. But as I say, that kindness of God doesn't always look or feel kind. C.S. Lewis puts it this way. What do people mean when they say, I'm not afraid of God because I know he's good? Have they never even been to a dentist? Doesn't really matter whether you grip the arms of the chair or whether you put your arms in your lap. The drill drills on. And it's true of grief. It really is. He also says we were promised sufferings. They were part of the program. We were even told, blessed are they that mourn. And I accept it. I've got nothing that I hadn't bargained for. Of course, it is different when the things happen to oneself and not to others. And in reality, not imagination. For 20 odd years, I've worked with people about suicide. I've worked with people who have been suicidal. I've been in homes where young people have been cut down. It's very different when you're looking from the sidelines to where you're playing on the pitch. And that was so, so difficult. So that was all the stuff that ministered to me and how God really ministered to me. Perhaps you prefer this. One friend left to sell clothes. One works down by the coast. One had 2 kids but lives alone. One's brother overdosed. One's already on his second wife. One's just barely getting by. The immortal words of Ed Sheeran, describing what we already know. I don't know if you're saved here tonight or not. Life rarely turns out how we hoped it would. So if you don't know the words of Lewis, I'm sure you know the words of Ed Sheeran. We have a path and we think things are going to go in a certain direction. Rarely do they ever go in that direction. And I know that as I stand up and I share and I'm honest about my own grief, this room's full of grief. Absolutely filled with grief. And I know you're here tonight because you want to hear something that's real, something that's genuine. Because when you're facing problems, the psalmist wasn't talking about praying to the mountains when he says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. The mountains were the problems. Usually that's where the robbers hid. You know, that's where there was a certain man who was on his way to Jericho. And it's the Good Samaritan where the thieves beat him up, the robbers beat him up. So he was looking to the mountains as his problems. I don't know what your mountains are tonight. I don't know why you grieve your parents. You grieve your mum or your dad. Where you grieve your child, your son or your daughter, or a child not even born. I don't know why you grieve your children that you don't see anymore, or the grandchildren you no longer see. Relationship problems, debt, bullying, exams, perhaps a cancer diagnosis. Maybe your world's fell apart because you're caring for somebody that you love. Facing a terminal illness. Or coping with a father, a mother, husband, a wife whose brain has got old and doesn't just work the way it should. And so they're changing. They're not who they used to be. And their memories are not where they used to be. So you're beginning to care for a parent in the way that a parent cared for you. Mountains in your life, because we all have them. Sometimes they're the size of Cave Hill. Sometimes they're the size of Everest. And you need something, or rather someone, who's real. So I wonder, when you lift up your eyes to the hills, to these mountains, where does your help come? Is it your friends? Is it alcohol? Is it drugs? Is it Facebook? Which seems to be a big counselor for people at the minute. Well, the psalmist, he answers his own question. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Church, to get this help, you need to have your sins forgiven. In order for the Lord to be your help, you need to have your sins forgiven. Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift, free gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. So someone has to die. You see, that's the only mountain that matters. It's not Everest. It's not the Himalayas. It's Golgotha. It's Calvary. That's the only mountain that matters. So when Jackie said it's not about Everest, it's not. It's never about Everest. It's about Calvary. Go with me with this. If I was able to get down to the airport, Belfast, George Best City Airport, and fly 4 hours to Jerusalem, if I could time travel and go back 4,000 years, I would see a man called Abraham bringing his wee son Isaac up Mount Moriah. And he's taking him to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him. You know, God never intended Abraham to sacrifice his son. This was a picture. This was an image. Abraham was representative of God the Father, being willing to sacrifice his son. Isaac was representative of Christ, being willing to die for the sins of others. And we read that little boy Isaac, he's carrying the wood for the burnt offering. He's carrying the very mechanism by which he will be killed. And just as the blow is about to be struck, the knife in his father's hand, just as the blow is about to be struck, God says, stop. I will provide a lamb. Church, 2,000 years later, God brings his son Jesus to Jerusalem, to Mount Calvary. And Christ is carrying his own cross, the instrument upon which he will die. And this time, God does not stop the fatal blow. He dies in our place to give a free gift. A free gift not only to deal with our sins, but to become a God that holds the jar in our lives. I just wonder where you're at tonight. Can you declare as the psalmist, my help comes from the Lord? Don't leave tonight without being able to say that.